what's easier than shipping a pallet and just taking an order one at a time in bulk like that? So I think generally once you go below 30 $30 ASP, I would say on Amazon, then it starts to become harder and harder to be profitable, which is why it's very hard for a $5 item to find a one pack of anything on Amazon because of their supply chain costs.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Scaling an e-commerce brand is hard, and it's becoming harder with the expansion of marketplaces. While they offer significant opportunities and an easy way to acquire customers, each channel and the marketplace has fairly stringent requirements regarding their quality standards and what they like to see from the vendors. Also, the more you move your products and the longer your products have to travel, your supply chain costs increase significantly. In today's episode, we have our guest, Rick Watson, who shares how to plan for warehouse and logistics architecture for DTC brands selling through marketplaces. He also shares why SKU-level planning and profitability analysis is critical for product and channel fit. Finally, he discusses his insights into concepts such as SFP and the difference between centralized distribution strategy versus using retail locations as fulfillment warehouses for e-commerce channels. Let me introduce Rick to you. Rick Watson founded RMW Commerce Consulting after spending 20 plus years as a technology entrepreneur and operator exclusively in the e-commerce industry with companies like Channel Advisor, BarnesandNoble.com, Mercantary, and Pitney Bowes. Watson's work today is created on supporting investors and management teams incubating and growing direct-to-consumer businesses. Most recently, in partnership with WHP Global, Rick was a critical resource in architecting the WHP Plus platform, a new turnkey direct-to-consumer digital e-commerce platform that powers AnnKlein.com and josephwood.com. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Rick, welcome to the show.
Great to meet you, Sam, and glad to be on.
Okay, and glad to meet you as well. And I am super excited to have you just because the kind of background you have in the retail planning, the logistics planning for the e-commerce. The world has changed a lot in last 3 to 5 years. So it'll be so much fun to discuss all of that. Before we do that, just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and current focus, Rick?
Yeah, in terms of the things that I've kind of done in my career, I've been involved in e-commerce for the past 20 years, starting with Channel Advisor. I didn't intend to ever be in e-commerce. Obviously back in 99, e-commerce wasn't really a big thing, but once I started in the field, I just kind of grew to love it, and really that been through a number of companies like Channel Advisor, Pitney Bowes, BarnesandNoble.com, mostly in and around marketplaces, and e-commerce is really a huge passion of mine. In the last 2 years, I founded a boutique e-commerce consulting firm based in New York City, where I really work with a lot of manufacturers and distributors that are trying to invest more into e-commerce. And for these types of customers, e-commerce really means two things. One is direct-to-consumer e-commerce, and second, it means something like marketplaces, which is how can I sell through the major marketplaces like Amazon and Walmart and other places. For some of these businesses, it actually also means enhanced B2B e-commerce. And so how do you work with your partners better in a digital way rather than through traditional sales teams?
Yeah, so some humongous brands there, and I am pretty sure you have encountered so many different challenges when it comes to their logistics planning, the supply chain planning, and the e-commerce planning and the inventory planning is going to be equally relevant as well. So I think you are going to have super compelling stories there, and my listeners are going to learn so much. And you are so right with your comment about the definition of e-commerce changes as the hand change. So you are so right that there is D2C, there is e-commerce with marketplaces, and then my friends like to define it as more of the digital commerce because sometimes e-commerce, when people think about that, they are thinking about payment gateway, and they are like, hey, you know what? I don't do payments here. This is not e-commerce. I don't need e-commerce. Okay, so we are going to dig into all of that. But before we do that, we have one more standard question, Rick, for everybody that come on the show, and that is going to be your perspective on business growth, Rick.
Yeah, in terms of growth, obviously my focus is really going to be on e-commerce. And if you're talking to someone who's been selling wholesale for their entire history, most of the times you're manufacturing a product, you're selling it in pallets into stores, whether it's in Walmart and Lowe's and Home Depot or and Target or anyone else. Going to an e-commerce direct-to-consumer mindset is pretty much a wholesale transformation of your business. And that kind of growth plan really starts with things that aren't related to logistics. It starts related to business planning. How do you align your team? Do you have the right people in your organization? Are they aligned around the right goals? Does your organization even have the right capabilities? How do you find which SKUs you should be focused on online versus in your wholesale efforts? Do you have the ability to acquire the right content for these products? Because normally, if you're a manufacturer, you don't have to deal with content.
Yeah.
Online, content is your job because consumers need to learn more about your products. I think from there, the next area where people fall down on is actually making a proper sales plan and forecasting.
Yeah.
And so really understanding the SKU level profitability of everything that you are selling and what that might be selling in the next several months. That's super important because before you even start talking about logistics, if you don't know a sales plan and your SKU mix and are these things heavy or light, or do they need repackaging or relabeling? Do you need to introduce a new brand or not? The logistics team isn't going to care about any of that. They're just going to basically be left to deal with whatever is on the other side. And so after having a proper sales plan, then you can actually dive into supply chain planning, which is how are we going to ship pieces versus pallets effectively? How do we reserve space in our probably existing warehouse initially? How do we deal with the fulfillment by Amazon and these third-party fulfillment centers that these marketplaces, I wouldn't say always force you to use, but it definitely force you to reckon with, because it's not just like you can throw up a website and start shipping however you want. The marketplaces have standards that you need to abide by.
Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, they are definitely going to make the process difficult so that, you stick with them. They are incentivized to do that, and they are going to have business model aligned with their priorities. And you need to make sure that you are getting something aligned to your priorities. So obviously, when you plan for e-commerce, there are a lot of different decisions that you have to make. And you are so right that you have to plan for your SKUs, you have to plan for your channels, you have to do your sales planning. And after that, we are going to get into the supply chain planning. But for today's episode, we are going to be focusing mainly on the supply chain planning, mainly on the warehouse and logistics, and how to make the decisions between, let's say, you have the choice of FBA, and there is going to be major competition involved in that. And as you mentioned that, you have to segment your SKUs, You need to find out, okay, which are the SKUs that are really going to be profitable in each channel, and whichever makes sense, let's say for FBA versus 3PL, versus if you are going with some of the marketplaces, then you have to make all of these decisions. So let's say if I'm the executive, Rick, and I am starting on this journey for the first time. I hear that e-commerce is going to make me millions of dollars. And that is true in some cases. In some cases, that is probably not, right? But it's easier said than done because you have to plan in the right manner. If you don't, then in my opinion, I think you can burn out of cash very soon, and then you are going to complain that e-commerce does not work. Okay, so let's say if I'm doing my supply chain planning, I'm starting on my e-commerce journey. What would be your advice overall in creating the MVP? Is how I like to define for the warehouse architecture or the logistic architecture. How you would approach it, let's say if this were your business.
Yeah, I think the first thing is really understanding the SKU mix. What are your
Okay.
fast movers versus your slow movers?
Okay.
So, particularly if marketplaces are in the mix, ensuring that FBA, the consumers that are expecting Prime, for instance, on Amazon, let's just talk about Amazon for a second because they're the biggest player.
Yeah.
FBA doesn't have, you can't send unlimited products to FBA.
Okay.
And there are costs associated with housing your products in a third-party facility.
Yeah.
Those costs are less a lot of times than using a different 3PL because Amazon is the biggest provider and they can have better shipping rates and everything than all these other providers.
Yeah.
But the longer your products sit unsold in that facility,
Yeah.
the more you're going to get charged for storage fees in a third-party facility. So that's number one. It's like understanding what products go in third party should be your fastest movers.
Okay.
I would say the next step is what's called so that's fulfillment by Amazon. The next step is what's called seller fulfilled prime or SFP. Most manufacturers aren't going to be in the ability to support the prime standards from their own warehouse, and so they usually need to contract with a third party logistics facility. So if you need to make prime's 1 or 2 day guarantee 7 days a week, essentially, which is what Amazon makes you do with very, very little error. Using a 3PL is really going to be an important. So choosing the right 3PL partner for the next tier of SKUs that aren't quite as fast moving as your fulfillment by Amazon items, but are probably the middle set of your SKUs. Yeah. And then I would say your slower movers and your long tail, you want to put, and maybe your less important SKUs, you're not sure how they're going to go yet, keep in your existing facility, reserve space in your existing warehouses, which is itself a problem for a lot of manufacturers. I was visiting a site in New Jersey just 3 weeks ago, and I could tell you like 99% of that facility was stacked to the gills because they were worried with COVID that they weren't going to be able to get more product. And so a lot of stuff showed up late, and there's product literally up to the ceiling. So how are you going to fulfill out of a facility if it's too overstuffed, particularly if you're trying to fulfill pallets to your retail sales partners and pieces to your direct-to-consumer customers?
Yeah, so some very interesting insights there and some very interesting comment. And I want to make sure that the listeners are really aligned with what fast mover would mean in this scenario. So obviously we understand what fast mover means from the warehouse perspective. So I am actually going to give you some examples and maybe you can clarify that. So let's say if I have some SKUs that are, let's say, priced at dollar and I probably am making pennies in the margin and they are moving super fast. Okay, but I have the other product that is probably not going to be as fast moving, that is super high margin, but it's not as fast moving. So would you consider this dollar product as the fast moving? And would you recommend this for, let's say, the Amazon channel versus the 3PL versus the other channel that you mentioned, your own internal warehouse?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I would say in e-commerce, there's a couple of good rules of thumbs. There are two sort of baseline criteria for most products. A lot of it depends so much on the industry you're in, but I would say mainline consumer goods, if you don't have at least 40-50% margin,
Yeah.
it's going to be very hard to sell that product in any channel, just because of the baseline costs. You're going to have to advertise that product. You're going to have to house it. You're going to have to pay the marketplace for all their fees. You're going to have to pay your staff. So on a per piece basis, it's more expensive than shipping a pallet. Like, what's easier than shipping a pallet and just taking an order one at a time, in bulk like that? So I think generally once you go below $30 ASP, I would say on Amazon, then it starts to become harder and harder to be profitable, which is why you can't buy a one pack. It's very hard for a $5 item to find a one pack of anything on Amazon. The reason is supply chain costs. And so if you have a $5 item or a $1 item, I would say the first part of your supply chain planning would be, what is the right bundle size for that product if it's a fast mover? And so is it a 10 pack of that item? Is it a 20 pack of that item? Do you have to then package that differently than you do for your retail and sales partners? So I would say SKU bundling, that aspect of the strategy is critically important. And if that case, if it is a fast mover by that criteria as well in the bundle approach, then I would consider that $1 item bundled appropriately the fastest mover.
Okay, so that's again a very interesting insight, and I really like the bundling per channel, because each channel is going to have its own nuances, and you want to make sure that, let's say, if a product is really fast moving on one channel, may not be as fast moving on the other, but you want to decide based on that specific channel. So when you analyze this data of whether a product is really fast moving in that specific channel, for example, let's talk about Amazon versus 3PL. So let's say if I have my bundle, I have 3 bundle, okay? And I am doing a pack of 3, I'm doing pack of 5 and pack of 10. Okay, on Amazon, maybe the pack of 5 is really fast moving, and that's probably profitable as well, just because I have bundled 5 there. So I'm accommodating for my supply chain cost as well. So let's say if I do that on Amazon versus, let's say, how long back do you go in analyzing the data to determine whether a SKU or bundle is going to be fast moving in that specific channel or not?
I mean, generally, you can do some of this research before you start. Even you can analyze competition. There are very well-known sort of off-the-shelf tools to understand what types of products are selling in a particular category by your competition. How much are they advertising for? What is their sell-through on this products? What is their sales per month? So you can get an idea for similar products. But usually these are Amazon advertising and market analysis type solutions like a Jungle Scout or a Helium 10 or Teikametrics, or there are a number of solutions out in the space that help you understand what types of products are being taken up by consumers. So that's, I would say, number one. I always like to do different time windows always, so you can understand trends. So last 30, last 90, last year will give you an idea of, is the pace increasing or decreasing of this SKU? And do you have to shuffle between facilities over time if consumer demand of one SKU starts to wane or increase? You have to reevaluate that, at least I would say probably every 3 months.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So when we talk about changing the SKU bundling, obviously there are going to be a lot of moving parts that go along with it. You need to change your packaging line. You probably need to change your production line. You need to change the way you are pricing. So there are supply chain and operational implications. So let's say if you were to recommend a manufacturer or distributor that, okay, you start with pack of 3, pack of 5, pack of 10, you analyze the data. I don't know how long you want to analyze the data. And you did mention that, you can analyze before going in the marketplace. So you have some sense. But then you need to trust your own data, because the other data that you are going to get from the marketplace is probably going to be different. And you are probably going to get some surprises in your data as well. So I don't know, how long do you recommend to monitor once you have, let's say, start promoting my pack of 5 is going to Amazon, my pack of 3, pack of 5 and 10 is going to DTC, and maybe one of them is going to 3PL. So would you recommend that I analyze this data for roughly 6 months, 3 months before I change the line again? How long would you analyze your own data?
Yeah, I mean, I think 3 to 6 months is a perfectly reasonable time. It gives you a sense for the market and the competition, because especially when you're launching a new channel, there are a lot of things that you're going to need to fix.
Okay.
And so to evaluate the performance, you need to make the SKU the best version of itself. And so that starts not with just supply chain. And so to understand your profitability, you need to understand the sell through of this product, and is it worth me investing more time in? And so if I have the best content, for instance, for this product versus a SKU that maybe has very weak content,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a problem of the bundle or the SKU.
Yeah.
It's a problem that maybe people aren't finding the product, or you're not advertising it properly. So that definitely, tuning that, I would say, definitely takes at least 3 to 6 months.
Okay, amazing. So let's dig into some of those stories, and I'm pretty sure you are going to have a ton of those, right? So let's say, and when you are going into these facilities, you can almost tell by looking at them that something is off here, because you can always fine tune these things. So let's say when you engaged with a specific engagement, what was their warehouse and logistics and supply chain plan? What were your findings, and how did you fix those? So do you have any specific stories that you might be able to share?
Yeah, I mean, usually, manufacturer I went in recently, I think one of the most common problems,
Yeah.
there are, everyone has sort of different kinds of problems, but you see a number of patterns.
Yeah.
One is collaboration between the marketplace team, whoever is on the e-commerce team, and the supply chain team is often very, very weak in terms of operations, forecasting, and promotions. So if you're going to run a promotion on an item on a Monday, a lot of times, when does the supply chain team find out about that promotion? On Tuesday morning, after the promotion is done. And they're dealing with a huge backlog of orders, when really they need to know a month before to do their labor forecasting. So I think understanding the impact of sales forecasting to the labor, which is one of the critical issues and sticking points in the supply chain industry, is like, how do you plan the workers that are going to actually need to ship out these products every day for a direct consumer channel? That's very different capabilities than shipping pallets. And so I think the sales operational loop, from a forecasting point of view, is number one. I think the second thing is actually having someone on the e-com team who's responsible for operations. So most of the time, you have someone who's worried about get the listings live and dealing with customer service. But then if orders aren't going out on time, the marketplace team is just lobbing it over the wall and just yelling at someone, rather than every day meeting them with about metrics and standards and helping them understand the importance of the channel. I would say that's another thing I see commonly. I think the final thing that is the hardest thing for people to get around is usually just a cultural shift between going into e-commerce versus selling toward these big, huge customers that are ordering pallets of product. For any new business, that's going to be 0.01% of their existing business that they've been running successfully for 10, 20, 30 years, even sometimes. And most of these sales leaders see it as a huge nuisance. Why would I need to do this? It's almost like something got stuck on their shoe, and they're trying to get it off. Like this is very uncomfortable. And unless that person has specific incentives to improve that business, likely they're going to resist it. And not provide product or resources or e-com specific orders unless that direction comes from the CEO. And so I think that kind of cross-organization alignment is super important too.
Yeah, so you are so right. I mean, see, I keep hearing this from every e-commerce guest that I get on this show, to be honest, that cross-functional alignment is going to have significant impact overall in the success of your e-commerce strategies, also with respect to your customer experience. And you are so right about the incentives for salespeople. They just don't want to get into e-commerce because they might be able to make far more commission in the bigger
Right.
orders. I mean, see, why are they doing this? So obviously, you need to align the compensation there as well. But let's say, obviously, you have two or three different points there. Number one, the structuring of the right team, bringing the right people, for the right process, and bringing some of the cross-functional people as well, so that they bring some of the supply chain intel to e-commerce and probably some representation of e-commerce to your finance and operations as well. And then the other part is really designing these facilities in a way that you are going to be closer to your customers so that you can fulfill or meet the expectations. Now, if your sales operations plan are not going to be aligned, then obviously you are going to get tons and tons of issues, right? So let's say that they are aligned, okay, but now you are planning the facilities, you are planning the supply chain, you are shipping orders in many different states, let's say in the US. From the DTC perspective, then you have the Amazon channel as well. I don't know if the percentage of split of the deliveries that are going to each of these channels are going to be important or not. But let's say you have all sort of combination and you need to design your warehouse and facilities across the country. So how would you approach this? How would you design the warehouses where they should be structured? Should they be closer to the customer? Should you be segmenting based on where your majority of the customers are and probably create that hub architecture from the warehouse perspective? Are you going to consider some of the retail locations in this warehouse and logistics planning? So can you touch a little bit more on the where you should be creating these facilities?
Yeah, I think some of it kind of goes back to the SKU planning. So understanding what are your fast movers. The key is that the closer you get to the customers, the faster you can deliver to them and the lower your cost.
Right.
But moving product around is very expensive.
Yep.
And so understanding items where the sell-through of items and where they need to be close to your customers. Most people that are starting out start out with sort of a home-based facility, and then they make, a lot of times that's in the Northeast somewhere, usually in New Jersey or Pennsylvania or Kentucky or somewhere, and then they need a facility on the West Coast and maybe in the middle of the country. And so that's usually the starting point where you get items that are maybe your top 40% of sellers distributed in all of the facilities so that you have 2-day coverage or even next day coverage, across the country in the US. And so I think that's kind of number one. Even I would say your fastest movers of that, you should put as much as you can into Amazon, into Fulfilled by Amazon, to take advantage of their rates, because then you're not responsible for the fulfillment. Basically, you're just shipping pallets to Amazon and Amazon is fulfilling on your behalf. And so you're taking advantages of Amazon's very low shipping rates, and as well as it's going to be your highest sales numbers because you're taking advantage of Amazon's Prime guarantee. So I think having multiple facilities, obviously, across the country, is no secret to faster ship times and to lower costs. I think in terms of retail locations, the big thing is treating your stores as nodes of your fulfillment network. And that has to do a lot with people, process, and technology in the stores, whether in the back office of your stores or your front office, from people that are picking items that are coming in, so that consumers can have a good experience. They can pick up something curbside, and having a good order management system and point of sale system working together with your e-commerce platform is super important, because inaccurate inventory can foil the whole problem. If you have an item that a person orders and then they're out of stock, they show up at the store, they're going to be angry at you. So it always starts with inventory management at the store level. And so I would say that's even trickier than normal e-commerce, because you're dealing with store associates and consumers that are moving items around your store, and then you have associates that are trying to go get the item and it's not where it's supposed to be.
Okay, so you actually mentioned one of the very interesting point related to Amazon, that you are really, especially if you are utilizing those fast movable goods, and you are simply shipping the pallets. But let's say if you were in the traditional retail setting, and the world was really good back then, right? You didn't have to worry about Amazon. You didn't have to worry about marketplaces. It wasn't as complex. You didn't have to worry about your DTC. You had simple retail store. You were simply shipping the pallet and let them figure it out, let them sell and bring me money. So let's say if I compare the Amazon world with my traditional retailer. In case of traditional retailer, I'm still shipping pallet of goods from my warehouse. In case of Amazon, especially FBA, I'm still shipping my pallet of goods, and Amazon is really selling that. If you were to compare the traditional retailer versus the Amazon FBA, are there any differences in these two models from the supply chain or fulfillment perspective? Or can they be treated similar as the customer group if I'm the operations guy?
I mean, they have to be somewhat different. Number one is your space in FBA is not unlimited, so you're still going to have to figure out how to ship eaches directly to consumers, likely from your own facility. I would say that's number one. And so the second is Amazon has its own language for everything, and so you have your own software. You have its own chargebacks. You have to prepare products a certain way compared to how a retailer does it, and so you need to learn a new set of capabilities to deal with Amazon, and there are even FBA prep warehouses, to help you prep your products for Amazon, so that Amazon doesn't charge you extra when your pallet arrives, for instance.
So do you have any stories or the examples that you might be able to provide related to the Amazon language that you are talking about? Let's say if somebody has never worked with Amazon before and they are prepping themselves up for the new language, and they need to know what they are getting into. So can you provide some examples that if I'm shipping my own products to my own channels, to my own retailers, but then I need to translate that into Amazon language. So what all am I looking at here? Am I looking at simply changing the packaging, or am I looking at anything else related to the product?
Yeah, it's primarily labeling and packaging.
Okay.
In terms of how that's done, so how those things are labeled properly. Just in terms of the language, a lot of times just the Amazon acronyms. The number of acronyms in the Amazon universe, it's like 3-letter acronyms, is huge. So even just the idea that I think everyone understands what Prime is. And I think most people have some idea of FBA, or fulfilled by Amazon. But then when you start to get in other acronyms like SFP, or seller fulfilled Prime, most companies don't have too much experience with what that means or for your business. And then finally, FBM, or fulfilled by merchant, that's Amazon's way of saying you're shipping it yourself. You know what I mean? So sometimes Amazon invent terms for things that you're already doing, and that causes a challenge for a manufacturer trying to understand what Amazon is telling them to do.
Yeah, so since you mentioned the SFP term 2 times, and my listeners may be wondering that, what, I really don't know that. So let's say if they want to learn about what is SFP, can you describe a scenario in detail, how the SFP is going to be different from, let's say, fulfilled by Amazon or from FBM?
Yeah, I mean, really, it goes back to the promise of Prime on Amazon. And Amazon Prime means that you're going to get your product anywhere in 1 or 2 days, and there's going to be a guarantee. And if there's any problems, Amazon's going to cover it. And most shoppers on Amazon are looking for the Prime badge, probably much in excess of 80 to 90% for sure. So what Amazon saw as it's developed its marketplace is that most sellers aren't good at shipping. And that was the vast majority of customer service issues related to things that were going on. And so they introduced sort of 2 programs to combat this. One is FBA and the other is SFP. FBA, I won't talk about too much. It's basically Amazon doing your warehousing for you. SFP is essentially a third-party warehouse facility. Actually, it could be your own, but most likely it is not. There are probably less than 20% of warehouses that are realistically can certify themselves for SFP. It means that your warehouse facility is passing all their strict requirements of meeting the Amazon Prime badge, which means that you're delivering orders on time and in full with the right carrier at the right time, and your return rate is low, your cancellation rate is low, you're shipping things out the same day, all the things that Amazon makes you do, you as a seller have been certified to do that for yourself. So you can earn the Prime badge with SFP if you certify yourself for that and not use FBA.
Interesting. So I actually want to go back to your comment about the treating your retail locations as the fulfillment node, right? So since we have so much complexity nowadays, you have your POS, you have your e-commerce channel, and then we have this cross collaboration between your channels as well. Shoppers buying on your e-commerce, coming to your store, picking the good there, right? So when you are looking at the centralized distribution strategy or the distribution strategy, right? So you mentioned that, you know what, treat these retail locations as the fulfillment node. I don't know if companies are shipping for e-commerce from these retail locations, or do they, let's say, ship from the centralized warehouse where they are going to have far more SKUs, far more products to be able to fulfill. So do you have any recommendations in terms of where your centralized warehouse should be? And you did mention, when you mentioned that, you know what, you are probably going to have one warehouse in your northeast, and one in the middle of the country, and then one probably in the west coast. But then you might have some of the retail locations as well. Can you treat them as your distribution center? If you, then what are going to be pros and cons?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that having two distribution models is very difficult for any major retailer. For instance, if you and different retailers have different strategies. Target, for instance, over 95% of all items that you order from them online are actually shipped from their stores or touch their store in some capacity. And that has been a very deliberate choice for them not to ship through centralized facilities, because those centralized facilities shipping direct to consumers have to be completely configured differently than a centralized facility that's restocking a store, for instance. And so what Target saw was the economics don't make sense for us to have two completely different distribution models or supply chain models for different channels. We have these thousands of stores that we're invested in. That's going to be our primary model. And so what we're going to do is reconfigure our entire supply chain so that the stores become more efficient at things that consumers want to do, which is pick up curbside, picking up in store, returning to the store. Those are all things that these are baseline consumer expectations these days. And so even if you don't know how to do it, it's something that likely that you're going to be asked to do, very soon by your consumers.
So do you have any pros and cons? So obviously Target did this, and this is an amazing strategy. But let's say if you don't have those 1,000 retail locations, you probably have 5. Okay, would you reconfigure your distribution model for the e-commerce differently than your retail channel, or would you try to reutilize some of those?
So I think when you the best advice for anyone is to start where you are, really. And so using those separate facilities, the centralized facilities, is probably the best way to get started, particularly if you have a smaller chain, because you can't fulfill across the US. But likely you place the stores where they are for a reason, because they're near your customers. And so it's almost criminal not to use them as efficiently as you can, and to start tracking. Usually the start of this journey starts with tracking metrics. What percentage of your customers can you deliver to in one day within 30 miles of those stores that you do have, even those 5 stores? And can you make those stores more efficient from a sales per square foot point of view than they are today, because they're actually handling some of those e-commerce orders? So that's kind of number one. The second is, can you start tracking metrics around these stores? Like how many out of stocks are you getting? When an order goes to the store and you think it's on the shelf, but is it actually on the shelf? Those things, and each one of those things is a reason, and that's an exception. That's an exception which has a root cause which needs to be tracked down. And so that starts a big operational journey, mostly regarding replenishment and inventory management, that I would say a lot of manufacturers and retailers are on.
Okay, Rick, so that's it for today. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts or advice?
Yeah, I think to me, the big message for everyone is don't be scared of what's happening here, right? Because the reality is most people walk into e-commerce thinking this is something that's happening to them. And because they think it's happening to them, it becomes immediately your body engages this flight or fight response, and it becomes a threat. E-commerce is a threat to my business.
Yeah.
That whole conversation really needs to be turned around, because omni-channel and all these fancy terms about where e-commerce is going, it's really about making things more convenient for your customer. How does your customer buy? Can you make it easier to find information? Can you make it easier for them to buy or pick up an item from you in the context of their workday when they're on the way home picking up their kids from school? Can they also stop by and pick up their groceries from you, or like whatever it is? It's about looking at where are the primary points that the consumer is going to interact with us, and how can we make that as efficient as possible for them?
Okay, and my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, obviously, don't be scared of e-commerce, because that's where the opportunities are. As these marketplaces and the business models are popping in on a daily basis, there are significant number of opportunities, and it's up to you whether you want to jump on those or be scared of learning new language of Amazon. On that note, I really want to thank you for your time, Rick. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Thanks so much, Sam.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Rick, head over to rmwcommerce.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Paul Sonneveld, who discusses the marketplace expansion strategy for e-commerce sellers or manufacturers aspiring to expand their footprint through digital commerce. Also, the interview with Jason Greenwood, who discusses the nuances of the click and collect process and why you need a centralized inventory and distribution strategy to enable this experience. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.